Well, hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Roy Harriman with Ministry Pacific, and I am here with wonderful, insightful representatives from HR Ministry Solutions, Tiffany Henning and Gina Baker. And momentarily, we are going to plumb the depths of their insight to learn how we can make this confusing bill a reality in our churches. California AB 506. What do your staff and leaders need to understand? I know that you're here today because you're committed to this process, because this is probably the last thing that you wanted to do. So was to spend time trying to understand this, but we know you're committed to people and you're committed to doing the right thing. So we appreciate that. You may have already read about or watched a presentation on AB 506. Maybe it's one that we did. And those are foundational, but often when they come from a legal perspective or a regulatory perspective, they can be difficult to understand in terms of how to make practical application. So to help us, we have two trusted guests and friends of Ministry Pacific, Tiffany Henning, President, and Gina Baker, Senior Vice President of Human Resources. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
You may wonder, what does this have to do with human resources, as isn't it about children's ministry? Well, although AB 506 is a legal matter, it's ultimately a people management issue, and that's where Tiffany and her team excel. But before I begin asking them questions about this legislation and its application, Tiffany, tell us a little bit about HR Ministry Solutions and how you could possibly be meeting a need for somebody who's in our audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. We are an organization that does HR, but we only do it for churches and ministries. We're a faith-based nonprofit ourselves. And so all of my staff have worked in a church or ministry and understand those special nuances that go along with it, because it's not always cut and dry. And obviously you have to approach your ministry and your people differently than they do in the corporate world. So really our heart and passion is to help churches provide and protect their staff so that and their organization, so that they can really do ministry in a sustainable, healthy way in a long haul. So I am, again, Chief People Person, which basically means President of HR Ministry Solutions. I founded it in 2016 and have amazing people on my staff. And probably the most amazing, sorry, Justin, if he's in here anywhere, is Gina Baker. I have known Gina for, 13 years. I think we've met in previous ministries working together. And she not only is part of our executive senior team, she is also our California guru. So when it comes to this kind of thing, she works with her entire team that constantly are hearing questions from HR people and everything like that. And so Gina is completely invaluable, which is why she's going to be doing a lot of the speaking today. I just want to piggyback though on what Roy has said. Our brand, our what we try to do is to simplify everything. And because this, like, I've been to webinars where there's just pages and pages of the law, and even I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And so our goal is a Sesame Street, to take all the information, whittle it down, and let you know 1, 2, 3, this is what you need to do, and here's the answers to those what if questions. And so that's what we're really going to focus on today.
Obviously, I'm Gina Baker. I have been with HR Ministry Solutions for about 3.5 years now, and I've been in HR for well over a decade. But yes, I am all things California when it comes to HR, and there's so many nuances here, not just with AB 506, but pay transparency and all of the other kind of hot topic things that are all happening in our state right now. What we do at HR Ministry Solutions, like Tiffany said, is we just walk along our clients, help it make sense. And depending on what service they're on and that sort of thing, we really partner with them to strategize and help them work through like real life problems and how they can implement change right now that will help to either bring them into compliance or enhance the culture that they have.
Excellent. Great overview. And employment law, human resources matters are something that churches often take for granted that they're doing right, if they even think about it. And so it's always good to double check your practices. It's a lot better to do it on the front end than on the back end when there's a problem. So thank you both, and thanks for joining us. So Gina, let's go ahead and frame our discussion today of AB 506, because we have people joining us who have diverse understandings
Sure.
of the law. Can you cover the core components of the law, just for those who don't understand or need a refresher, and then we'll go back and look with more depth.
Sure, of course. So first, I want to clarify who this applies to. In its simplest form, it applies to you. If you serve any sort of youth, whether it's an event or a program or anything like that, you are required to comply with AB 506. This includes churches, it includes schools, it includes daycares, nonprofits, etc. Within the organization, who it applies to are administrators, which is in church world, that's typically board members and executive level members, employees, and regular volunteers. Then the three components are required trainings. The topics that are included in that are typically child abuse and neglect identification, so that even if something isn't being reported to an adult, they can kind of know signs to look out for. That way they can help identify those, as well as training in child abuse and neglect reporting and mandated reporter training. And then the third piece of it is that background check along with fingerprinting, which is many people have heard live scan over and over again as AB 506 has been launched. But what that is a criminal background check through the California Department of Justice for fingerprintable offenses. And those are only being checked for within the state of California. And I'll circle back on that a little bit later too. And then lastly, developing a child abuse prevention policy as part of AB 506 is a requirement of it as well. So each organization will need to develop a policy, or if they already had something in place already, just revamping it really to make sure that it's compliant. That way that they're ensuring the reporting of suspected child abuse.
I just want to jump in really quickly, because I know sometimes in churches the word youth means like student ministry, junior high, high school. I just want to clarify that it's anyone under the age of 18. So that's your children's ministry, that's your preschools. And I also want to point you, as we go through this, Gina and her team have made an amazing web page that has lots of information about this as well. So if you're trying to scribble notes really quickly and go, I didn't even catch that, and if your head's already exploding, please know we have that information broken down in different kind of resources and stuff on our website.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is, if you happen to be here and you're not in California, or you have multi-states that you're managing, mandated reporters are still a thing, obviously, in all of the states. So part of our website and that resource page Tiffany was talking about, there's 2 different buttons that you can click to enter California specifically, or just mandated reporters kind of in general, and more information on that.
And that's really good too, because what we see time and time again is what California does, other states will follow, in the following years. So even if you're not in California, keeping your eye on this ball is super important, because nothing can destroy. I mean, the whole sex abuse, everything has been so in the news the last 5 to 10 years, and it will basically, even a claim of it, whether it's true or not, can completely decimate your ministry. So that's why we're really talking about this, and that's why we want to break it down for you so that you can protect your ministry on a whole.
What was helpful to me to understand, okay, what is the actual change that is taking place is essentially, before this law, there was very little in terms of legislative mandates placed upon churches and nonprofits in terms of the way that they supervise children. The background checks were certainly wise, but they weren't mandatory. Right. The child supervisory policies needed to be done, but they weren't mandatory. And so this is saying, hey, you have to do this now. Gina, as you work with people, from your vantage point, what are some of the main points of confusion and misunderstanding about the law that are coming up?
Yeah, so common questions that I hear a lot, and I've actually seen a few in the chat already also, is what does regular mean? when you're talking about a volunteer, and the law here has defined it. So a regular volunteer is anybody at least 18 years old or over who volunteers regularly with direct contact or supervision. Regularly means at least 16 hours a month or 32 hours in the year. Now, I'll just call it out here, like not all churches track hours of their volunteers. So that's going to be a decision when you're making your policy and deciding how you're going to go about this, that you're going to have to consider. Are you going to start tracking, or are you just going to do this across the board, no matter what, if they're serving in children's or students and minors, like Tiffany said?
Yeah, because it's easy for someone to maybe do one or two things, and then all of a sudden they're doing more, and you're thinking,
Yeah.
oh, they were doing it before, so they must be background checked.
Mhm.
So yes, I agree with you, Gina, that actually doing it for everyone, it's consistent, and then no one falls through the cracks, and then you don't have to take time tracking how much they're working.
Yeah, the benefit of doing it that way also is, VBS is coming every summer, and you're going to have this huge push and need for volunteers. And if you have a bunch of new people and it's May and VBS starts in 3 weeks, it's possible that they're not going to get through all of this in time. And so just doing it from the get-go with your volunteers, you're going to have more to pull from when you have big, large, all hands on deck kind of events.
Just speaking as someone who has served on a couple of church staff, so you know where my heart is. And maybe your experience is different, but my experience is churches are often not the most organized places. And so
Yes.
like the hours counting specialist, if there is one, as Tiffany said, may be doing many other things.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And you can guarantee that if you end up in court, that the plaintiff's lawyer or the prosecutor is going to be checking your hours to see if the person or any people who were involved in giving care to children actually met the criteria. So why, my thought is, why fight that battle? Train people, it's safer, it's better.
It's not worth the risk. It isn't.
Right. So
No.
not to
Not
interrupt
from a
you.
legal perspective or a human perspective. It's just
No.
not worth it. The other question is, what about staff? Is it all staff, or is it just children's and youth staff? It is all staff, which I would have said is best practice anyways, but I'm glad that it's all staff. There's just too much crossover. You never know what situation somebody's going to need to fill in at the last minute or whatever the case is. So all staff and then volunteers. The other question is, when did this start? Like, did I have to have this done yesterday? They tried to have this effective January of this year, but what they're realizing is the DOJ is backed up. Things are taking a little bit longer. People have large numbers of volunteers and staff to get through the training and everything else. So they've extended it now. So January 2024 currently is the drop dead when everybody has to comply. With the extension, they have said that we need to be doing background checks at minimum in the meantime. So do the training, have your prevention plan in place. All of that can be done now, and then do the background checks until you get an ORI number, which is what you have to apply for through the Department of Justice to be able to run the live scans. And then once you have that, then you're good to go. You can start running them. A follow-up question that will probably come from that is, once we have the live scan, does that mean we can stop doing the regular background checks? Normally this is because of cost, because we all know that this comes with a cost. AB 506 says you do not have to continue doing this, but HR Ministry Solutions and Ministry Pacific too probably says, please keep doing the background checks. It will save you a lot of headache in the end, really. Tiffany always kind of refers to background checks. There's different levels of background checks. I'll just throw that out there too. Our recommendation is always get the county court level, include that into your background check, because a lot of times counties are not required to report to the nationwide database. And so it becomes Swiss cheese like. So you may not see something at all if you're only checking nationwide and the state database. So always include county court record. Tiffany, do you have anything to add on that? I know you're pretty passionate.
Yeah,
but
because I know that you had mentioned too that the live scan is just California.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it doesn't pull if there's stuff from other states.
No, and it is only, what is pulling is only fingerprintable offenses in California. So,
Okay.
lower level offenses that would show up on a regular county court record isn't going to show up on DOJ, like most likely.
Yeah, see, that's good because maybe you want to know someone has a DUI because they're driving kids
Right.
around, or maybe you want to know someone has a fiscal offense where they theft or fraud or something like that, and they're in charge of the ministry's budget, so really good. I'm going to get on a high horse for a minute here. Number one, because when you have people working in children's ministry or any kind of ministry that works with minors and stuff, always do reference checks as well. I don't care if they've been going to your church for 15 years, do reference checks. You will be surprised at what you find, especially when you're like, well, they're just giving me the people to contact for a reference, so of course it's going to be good. You'd be surprised. Also note that they could be, and I can't speak to the fingerprinting, but they could be in the process of a court case. And if there's not a conviction yet, it may not appear on any of the background checks. So this is why it is super important to do all of these things. Now, a lot of you are going, time, money, oh my gosh. But let me tell you, and you've probably seen in the news, like this, even a claim of it, even if it's not true, can completely destroy your ministry. And we know it's a little bit extra cost, but you know what? Maybe don't get church t-shirts one year. Maybe tell all staff they're not allowed to charge Starbucks coffees, or, even smaller things. Really, 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 this is huge protection. This is like insurance. So you want to do it because people assume that you are a safe place. People assume your staff are safe people. They assume who works with their kids are safe people. And so you want to make sure you've done your due diligence and done everything possible to make sure they are safe. There are sex offenders in your church. You just don't know about it. So, again, and you would probably be surprised who actually is a registered sex offender.
And I don't want to interrupt you, Gina, but there's a helpful, a good question, a lot of good questions, but it was, you were mentioning getting county level data on background checks. Elena says, doesn't the live scan cover the counties? Why would we need to do a scan for a county if we're already doing a scan for the whole state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it will cover counties in California. However, in ministry, we all know it's pretty common for, especially when you're talking higher level pastor positions and that sort of thing, for people to move specifically for these positions. If they move from another state into California, anything that happened before they just came and joined your staff, you will have no knowledge of. So that's where.
Yes. Okay. So essentially, you weren't meaning California counties, you're meaning state level criminal data everywhere. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very good.
It'll check all of the counties that they have lived in within the last 7 years.
As leaders, we will set the standard for communicating about things. It could be, okay, the air conditioning broke in July. Well, if we go around complaining, boy, it's hot and miserable in here, oh, I'll never get through this. And then you have, people leading kids, people doing everything. Well, what is that going to do? You still have to fix the air conditioning. It's still broken. And so we have a related challenge here. Let's be honest. No one asked for this. Churches didn't lobby and have a huge rally and say, please give us a mandate. It's here nonetheless. And so some of the things that may be bouncing around people's head is this is a big government mandate. The state's telling us what to do. And to a lesser extent, it's a change in the way that things are done. We don't usually like change unless it's our idea, right? It will require some longtime caregivers and volunteers to submit a fingerprint scan. They may take that personally. Don't you know me? And there is a cost. It's not a phenomenal cost, but there is a cost. Do you have some thoughts about how can we be honest about the challenges of this, but present it in a way that helps us to move forward, as opposed to creating kind of a grumbling spirit that won't help anything?
Absolutely. And there's going to be challenges that come up with anything that's new. Like you said, when it's changed, there's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be hesitation. My recommendation is just the more you can communicate the why behind it and not this is what you have to do. Yes, that needs to come too, but that should come second. The why really needs to be crystal clear, not only to the staff, and maybe prepare the staff with some talking points on how to curb challenges that volunteers bring to them. That way it's a united front communicating the same thing, but also leading by example. Board and staff first. Maybe that's the very first group you're going to tackle, and then move on to your volunteers. That way they can give you feedback and work out the bugs a little bit too before you launch it to a bunch of volunteers who may be frustrated. As far as the challenge of actually facilitating everything, what I've heard and seen done with a lot of our clients, it also depends on the size, right? If you have a smaller volunteer pool, it's easier kind of just to send them one at a time to the live scan facility to take care of everything based off of their schedule. But what I've also seen done is turn it into more of like an outreach opportunity, turn it into a volunteer kickoff event, have a barbecue, get everybody together, get them their t-shirts that they need, get them, use it as an appreciation time also, but then also like, hey, there's a few business items that we need to do. And that is this, bring in a mobile unit to do their live scans all in one place. You will have much more buy-in if you bring them to them and make it as convenient as you possibly can for them versus requiring them to set a couple, some time aside out of their schedule to go somewhere out of their way to get it done.
I like that. So kind of, this is going to be a kind of a party and a celebration as opposed to go over to the gulag and do your time, right?
Exactly.
And I really like what you said, Gina, about let the leadership go first. It made me think about when they were first elections in Iraq, and I believe they had the purple ink to show that they voted once.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine people rolling their fingers and holding up the, the thumb. Really, again, if we can have a celebratory attitude about it, the less difficult it will be. I don't want to act like we'll be, dancing and tossing flowers around.
There's lots of creative ways that you can get. You also don't have to do a huge event. You can also just say, hey, we're going to have the live scan company here from 2 to 4 on this day and this day. I've also seen it done that way. That way, it's not just one day at what time. It gives people some options. So it doesn't have to be a even greater expense than it already is going to be. But I think that, again, like people are busy and they're already giving their time to the church to volunteer. And the more we can honor that and make it as easy as possible on them, the more buy-in you'll have to get it done, and less babysitting on the back end and chasing people down you'll have to do.
As Tiffany said, news reports about churches and sexual abuse are fairly steady, unfortunately. And the two biggest hits have been with the Boy Scouts of America and with the Catholic Church. And not to say that there aren't lots of Protestant offenders as well. This is an opportunity, I believe, if we do this in the right way, to show our community, hey, we're different here. We take child safety seriously. We're all getting fingerprinted. And I think as a parent, that gives you some confidence in trusting your children to people at camp and at BBS and in Sunday school. So initially it could seem negative, but I think there's definitely a positive outcome that we value children, we value safety. Gina, have you thought about this? The cost is not cut and dried, unfortunately. We can't say it's $49.99. So there is one cost for employees that includes scanning cost, and then there's a fingerprint rolling cost. For volunteers, there is no scanning cost, but there is a fingerprint rolling cost. And each vendor can charge a little bit different amount between a range, but let's just say, tell me if I'm wrong, let's say it's $30 per volunteer. Any good ideas on how to budget for that, how to pay for that? Do you share the cost? Do you ask the volunteer to pay for it? How should we go forward with that?
I wouldn't ask the volunteer to pay for it. As far as I'm concerned, none of our clients have passed that cost on either to their volunteers. This has been being talked about for long enough now that more and more people are starting to build this into their budget, or did a little bit this year. I think in 2024, that absolutely needs to be part of the budget planning process and conversation this year to build this into operations, really. I mean, it's because it covers multiple ministries, it covers your staff, it covers your board. As far as creative ways to just find the funds to be able to do this, it's kind of like what Tiffany said. It's going back to the budget, looking at this and going, what is critical and what can we either press pause on or just skip this time, whether it's t-shirts or bumper stickers or an extra food truck and event, whatever the case is. Maybe it's Halloween candy at a trunk or treat thing. Now we're going to ask our volunteers to help, to bring that or to donate it instead, which will help to offset the AB 506 costs that comes along with it. The other thing is the training that's required is free as long as you use the state's training, which is also the training that we recommend, because California has been very vague on the specifics of exactly what needs to be included in that training and how long the training needs to be. So in our stance is that the California state training is the one that is compliant, that we can, direct people to, and the bonus is it's free.
Get a spreadsheet and figure out what your actual cost is. I think sometimes, and you may have done this, but I think sometimes we start thinking $30 here, $50 there, this, that, the other thing. We start to go, oh my gosh, nobody's going to like this. Just, take bite size and figure out how much it really is. And depending on how your church is, how big it is, what your budget looks like, there may be a need for you to go to the congregation and maybe ask for a special giving or whatever. Or if a couple of businessmen, women, someone who owns a company or whatever, who may be willing to sponsor the whole amount. So there's some other creative ways, especially when you present it like, hey, this is really going to protect our children. People are all for protecting children. And so I think you would get a lot of people to step up and help.
I think it's a great way to communicate it too, the way you were talking about, Tiffany, to tie into what Roy was saying, as far as educating the parents and the families who are attending that, hey, this is what we're doing and this is what's important to us. And this is what you can expect as parents as well. But I think it ties in well.
People come to a church that they're about if their kids and their youth are safe, if it's a great ministry, if they love it. Parents will put up with just about anything if their kids are just, really being filled up at a church or ministry, or they feel like they're super safe.
Once a church connects with the California Department of Justice and is able to obtain background check information, it's a process. It's not automatic. You have to apply and be accepted. Mm-hmm. Then a church will need to appoint a person or persons who is considered to be a custodian of records. So this confidential information will be limited to the person defined as the custodian or the custodians. So this is obviously a very important role. Any thoughts on how to choose such a person?
I'm going to talk about the process on how to become a custodian, because I think that that's important too. And then I'll touch on your question, Roy. So in order to obtain an ORI number, and there's several downloadable resources on our webpage, including, I think somebody was asking about a sample policy. We have that as well on the AB 506 page. But in order to obtain an ORI number, you have to apply through the Department of Justice. And with that, you have to appoint a custodian on record. So this is the person. The requirements are only this. They have to be at least 18 and they have to complete the application and pass the application. So that's pretty much their own in-depth version of this live scan and background check, criminal background check. But what their responsibilities are is the security, storage, dissemination, and destruction of the criminal records provided by the Department of Justice. And they will also be the primary contact for the DOJ as well. So when you're looking to decide who that person will be in the organization, obviously they need to be highly confidential. They need to have longevity, in my opinion, not only in the past and have kind of shown their true colors, but also somebody who plans on being there for quite a while, because changing a custodian of records is a speed bump, we'll say. And it would have to be done when that person makes the change into another role or in a different position outside of the church. And then the other thing too is they should be very organized in my opinion. There are, when it comes to the storage of these documents and the level of confidentiality, and you think about what kind of information you gather on a background check, and you don't want that falling into the wrong hands. So those are kind of what I would look at when determining who that person would be.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question. So we're talking about storage and stuff. I'm assuming because of the way this is all done, that any information would probably be stored digitally. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the custodian of record receives a login to the DOJ portal, and that is how they're communicated with.
Okay.
I will give you a little pro tip here. We've learned the hard way. But once you have your ORI number and your DOJ login, if you don't log in within 30 days, it expires. And every 30 days thereafter, if you're not logging in at least once every 30 days, it'll expire. So set a calendar reminder, do it at least once a month. I have one client who they do all of theirs quarterly, and that's kind of the way that they've set theirs up. And he let it go a quarter and realized had to jump through some hoops. So here's your pro tip.
That's good to know. So all the information is stored on the website. We don't have to download anything to save in our own files or our own database.
I believe all of that is provided to the custodian on records once they're approved of what exactly needs to be done. But yeah, for the most part, all of that is accessible through the portal, DOJ portal.
I'm just asking because you were talking about the dissemination and destruction. They have these fancy words, not the destruction's a fancy word, but I was trying to figure out, I'm assuming destruction, that you just keep people active or not active in the system, and then they would archive them or whatever.
Yeah.
I know another detail is that this information can't be accessed with, how can I put it, popular level email, Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail. It's got to be an official organizational email. So you may have to create a new email for someone.
Yeah. And I would also say, going back to this, the custodian on record may not be the person who is in charge of making sure all the volunteers get everything done and all of that. It may be a children's admin or a student's admin kind of making sure everything's happening in the background. Whoever that point person is going to be for the day-to-day, I would really encourage you, at least for this first initial push, look at their job description, figure out how much time this is going to take. Either if they're a part-time person, offer them to flex up a few hours each week to account for this. Or if it's a full-time person and you can shift duties just temporarily to allow them to dedicate to this, because this isn't something you want to fall to the bottom of the list. This needs to stay at the top until everybody gets through what they need to do. And then once this big group of people that you have currently that have not gone through the live scan process and the background checks, once they're done, this first group is done, it will be much easier to manage moving forward. It'll be a slow trickle instead of this kind of stampede that you have right now.
So you said this last January was supposed to be the line in the sand. Do they have a new line in the sand when this all needs to be done by?
Yeah, that's the January 2024 is the new line in the sand. So,
sorry.
no, that's okay. So you have 3 quarters left to get it done.
Do they have the option? I mean, they can break it down each month to spread it out over the next months? Okay.
The biggest thing is, if you have not applied through the DOJ to be approved to be the custodian on record in order to receive your ORI number, which again is what the number you need in order to be able to send people to get a live scan. It's like your EIN number, but this is specific to the DOJ is probably the easiest way to put it. But if you have not done any of that yet, that is the very first thing you need to do, and do it quickly, because they're so far backlogged and it is taking months and months and months for even people to get that. So that's why that background check is so important. Just the standard county court level background check and the training. Be proactive. Don't wait till the last minute to have to do all of this at once. That's going to overwhelm everybody more. If you can take it in bite-sized pieces again and go, okay, we're going to do the training. We're going to focus on the training this quarter. And then in Q2 this year, we're going to, focus on background checks, or vice versa, would probably be better. Break it up like that. That way it's not so overwhelming for everybody. It's easier for your team to manage internally, but also for a volunteer to go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I have to do this. and then it's completed.
So that's good. So like if you're waiting for that official number, you can still go ahead with other pieces of this, get
Yep.
everyone to fill out whatever form, if I don't know,
Yep.
if it's paper or
Do you-
whatever. So I like that. So you're prepared the moment you get the number to pull the trigger and get started on actually running the checks.
Yes. Well, and the fact is, like, you're showing your due diligence. You're doing the best you can with what you have
That's
while
true.
you're waiting. So if something were to happen during this time period, you could at least show that you made your good faith effort to comply to the level that you could.
And the custodian, it sounds like you were saying it actually could be like a higher level leader. They don't necessarily need to be the one who's running everything and stuff like
Right.
that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So they're the ones who are receiving all of the data, all of the approvals, or if somebody is flagged, that is going to go directly to that person.
But you could potentially make a separate email for them. Let's say I decide my senior pastor, my executive pastor is going to be the custodian. I can maybe make a separate email for them to use all their personal information. So technically they are the custodian and sign off, but that there's a separate person who operates it all. Can you do
I
that?
wouldn't have them operate the DOJ portal, but I would absolutely
Okay.
have like an admin, a point person, do all of the day-to-day, like getting the volunteer list, getting the staff list, of checking off who's done
Okay.
what, when, that sort of thing.
You can be thinking now about who would be a good custodian of records, or more than one individual who you can really entrust that to. So I really want to make the most of your particular expertise here at HR Ministry Solutions. And that is, the custodian is doing their job and they identify, let's just look at two scenarios. One, someone who indeed has a child sexual abuse offense and is therefore disqualified from serving with children. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is someone may not have a child sexual abuse offense, but say you find out that one of your deacons has a felony background for forgery. So that's an issue that may or may not need to be addressed, but we're going to get information that we haven't had before. And can you guide us through how we can respectfully protecting children, protecting people and reputations, and honor the law all at the same time?
I'll speak to kind of what the process will look like, and then Tiffany's going to jump in and just really talk through the relational piece and how to have those kinds of hard conversations. But when a background check fingerprint is submitted to the DOJ, if there is a flag, or if it's approved for that matter, both parties are going to be notified by the DOJ. So the volunteer, we'll just call them a volunteer. The volunteer is already going to know that there was a flag found. So they will likely be expecting a phone call or an email of some sort to initiate the next piece of the conversation. And like you said, Roy, obviously it's going to be drastically different based off of what is found. If it's a child offense, then that's an automatic no, disqualified. But if it is a forgery, or maybe it's a DUI, or lots of different other things. But Tiffany, this also applies to background checks too, just regular background checks that you run on people. What is your experience of how it works well when you have to have those hard conversations?
I think one of the key things that I've really seen that works well, at least from a care standpoint, is allow the person to tell their story. Because sometimes there is a story, and sometimes it's important for you to understand the story, because even though they may not be able to serve here, maybe they could do this, this, or this. And that's the other piece, is maybe find another place for them to serve and use their gifts, because that is super important. That way they don't feel necessarily rejected from the whole church. They just, understand that, we can't legally let you volunteer here, but a hospitality team or ushers or music team. The other piece that you need to know is that, again, you may find sex offenders in your church. How do you handle that? I know recently Gina and I were talking about a sex offender policy. I talked to a pastor who had this situation again. Number one, talk to your insurance company. You want to scale those things and figure out, are we going to still allow them at the church? Do we want them to be mentored by someone that kind of hangs out with them while they're at church? You want to have, again, we all think nobody's a sex offender here, but you would be surprised. So if that comes up, you need to talk about it now before it comes up, how you are going to handle it if someone comes up as a sex offender. Are they going to be allowed to go to small groups? Are they going to be allowed to be in your church anymore? Are they going to be allowed to serve in other ministries like hospitality? How are you going to handle that? So those are the conversations you should be having right now before you even implement this. That way you just pull the trigger on what you've already decided you're going to do if it pops up.
And so, Tiffany, if something like, we'll just say a DUI, if a DUI pops up and it comes back and they are going to be driving kids to camp, how would you handle that conversation and notifying the person that happened?
Again, it is a situation. If it was 7 to 10 years ago, that might be different than 7 to 10 months ago. You know what I mean? So I think this is why I'm like, there's black and white for something. Sex offender, obviously black and white, but for those kind of different things, it just depends. Well, they don't drive. They don't drive the person, or you create a different, guidelines. You handle it by person to person. This is why we say be grace-filled in your conversation. Yes, there's legal lines you need to draw, but be grace-filled, and also don't always take their word for it. If they say, oh, that was just a clerical error, maybe ask for some backup on that as well.
One thing that I've run into with a client of mine that I run their background checks for them is sometimes, and this is not for fingerprinting, I just want to be super clear, regular background checks, sometimes the system only pulls like a first name and a last name and a partial birthday match or something like that. And so it looks like they have this charge, but it's actually not them. You can't always assume that it's them. You can't always assume that it's not them. But again, I'll piggyback on Tiffany, allow them to share their story, allow them to talk about it. And if it really and truly is not them, allow them to teach them and give them the resources that they need to go back, report it. That way it can be removed from their background check and they don't have to run into this again. Because I think that's part of the care piece too, is making sure that they're being taken care of if it is false.
Yeah, the county court records, courthouse records are the most accurate. So generally those, because they actually use Social Security numbers and stuff like that. So
I'm so glad that the two of you joined us here, because you truly do bring a unique perspective. What Tiffany said is essentially let someone tell their story. So yes, the point of the meeting may be to tell you that you can't volunteer, but that doesn't have to be the end of the story. This is an opportunity to minister to people, like all of us are wounded, hurt, have hurt others. And how can we be a part of their healing journey? Now, that healing journey is not going to take place around children, but nonetheless, they are not discarded. They are not to be tossed aside. So excellent ideas. And as we're winding down, there are so many good questions here I've seen that we're not going to get to answer. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is, some of them require answers that are very specific to some of the questioner's unique environments. So a one-size-fits-all answer may not actually be what you need. So I encourage you to set up a consultation with HR Ministry Solutions, and you can email them through the website or hello@hrministrysolutions.com. Get more information than you need so that you can make a good decision. Another way that I think we can answer about 90% of these excellent questions is Ministry Pacific just finished a new ebook, The Layperson's Guide to California, AB 506. This was written sort of out of our inability to understand what lawyers are saying, or more honestly, to translate what they're saying. When we do these webinars, it's interesting. Time goes by really fast. A lot of great information is shared, but there's so many questions. And so I always encourage that let this be the beginning of the conversation, not the end, regardless of what the topic is, whether it's protecting your church network from computer hackers or having financial systems that are fraud proof. Something that important is going to take more than an hour to solve, right? Any last thoughts from Gina or Tiffany?
This is a serious thing. Don't put it off, and figure out a way to scale the money thing. This really is a non-negotiable on so many different levels. So obviously you're here because you realize that.
You guys have done a great job. At Ministry Pacific, we are here also to be of service and education and connect you with excellent people like Tiffany and Gina, as well as if you need legal consultation, we have people we can recommend for that as well. So thank you so much for the excellent questions. Please let us know. We want to help you succeed. Thank you so much.